mage. While the power to control mana is largely genetic, there are many cases where children of magi come out unable to sense the mana around them. A recent census showed that roughly 1 in 100 children are able to sense mana, but the extent of which could only be tested when their mana core first completely developed, anywhere from their early adolescence to late teen years. It will be apparent when a mage first awakens by the initial repellence of the surrounding mana when their mana core manifests. This results in a translucent barrier forming around the awakened that lasts a couple of minutes. Flipping through the pages, I found something that caught my attention. Mana can be used in a couple of ways. The two most common methods of utilizing mana are enhancement of the body with mana, augmenter, and emission of mana to the outside world, conjurer. Augmenters are most commonly seen amongst warriors who utilize mana, channeling it through their body to strengthen themselves and their attacks. The practice of conjuring is seen in mages, who, after utilizing their mana, can cast spells to give off a certain effect on the surrounding area or directly at a target. Weaknesses and limitations. While augmenters can possess incredible strength, defense, and agility, their weakness lies in their limited range. Conjurers possess unfathomable powers, being able to bend their surroundings to their will. However, such powers come with limits. Unlike augmenters, who utilize most of the mana in their own mana cores, conjurers need to borrow mana from the outside world, in addition to their own mana core, to exert mana into their surroundings in the form of a spell. While both types of mages, or mana manipulators, for the more scientifically accurate term, depend on and are categorized by their mana core, augmenters and conjurers also have different ways of measuring their aptitude. Flip. An augmenter's prowess or talent is measured by the strength of the mana channels in their body, which measures the speed and efficiency in relocating their mana from their mana core into various parts of their bodies. A conjurer's power and talent, comparatively, is measured by the power of their mana veins, which indicates the speed and effectiveness of absorbing mana from the outside world to cast a spell. Flip. Mages, mana manipulators, are typically categorized into one of these two divisions since attempting to be proficient in both from an early stage is incredibly time-consuming and inefficient. Most are born with a skewed difference in their mana channels and mana veins. Augmenters do not need very strong mana veins because they mostly utilize the mana from their cores, while conjurers do not need very powerful mana channels because they do not release their mana into their own bodies. As proficiency level rises, the distinction between augmenters and conjurers lessens naturally, but that is only so at an advanced level. So my idiot father seems to be a decently competent augmenter, and a less than average conjurer. That healing light though. What was my mother? Flip, flip, flip. Aha. There are a few rare deviants. The two most well-known types of deviants are elemental deviants and emitters. While there are still some undiscovered, ones that are highly sought after are the emitters, more commonly known as healers. Healers possess the rare ability to cast their unique restorative mana unto others, directly, recovering injuries and impairments. Wow, Mother is the best. Fundamentals of conjuring. The proper steps of utilizing mana for conjurers is to gather the surrounding mana in the area, drawing it into your body, then, after circulating it into your mana core to stabilize and purify the atmosphere's diluted mana, you channel it into an appropriate conductor, a staff, wand, ring, of some sort, with the incantations as a mental controller for your will into shaping the mana into whatever spell you want. Flip. The more powerful the spell, the longer it will take to draw in surrounding mana. Store it in your mana core, where it is condensed and purified, and finally channel and release. Flip. Because conjuring involves exerting focused mana into a particular spell, conjurers will notice that they have a special aptitude of certain elements, air, water, fire, earth, but with proper training, can become adequate in the basics of all elements. Flip, flip. Fundamentals of augmenting. Unlike conjuring, much less time can be spent gathering the surrounding mana. Efficient use of augmenting requires speed and precision in the use of the mana from your core and less from the mana in the atmosphere. This was where it clicked. Augmenting was very close to using ki, except you could also draw mana in from your surroundings. The reason why there weren't any kinds of conjurers in my old world of Earth was because there was no mana in the atmosphere to draw from and create a phenomenon. My gaze tensed as I read on. Augmenting requires proper distribution of mana into different parts of the body, depending on how the user sees fit. While it seems simple at a glance, augmenting requires much insight into the individual's own body. Being able to utilize the mana channels efficiently requires years of both mental and physical practice. Flip. Because augmenting involves extracting mana in its purest form from the user's mana core, there are no highly notable distinctions in an elemental sense at an early stage. However, augmenters are able to control their mana more freely, resulting in vastly different forms of fighting through augmentation. Flip. The phenomenon called backlash occurs in both types of practitioners. For augmenters, it occurs from depletion of the mana core, causing extreme bodily pain, depending on how strenuous the damage to the mana core is. For conjurers, backlash occurs from overfilling of the mana core. This is caused by overuse of spells beyond the practitioner's capacity, or using a spell too powerful for his or her mana core to handle. Closing the book, I propped myself up on my butt, digesting the overload of information that I had just read. Because of the uncanny similarities between the key center from my old world and the mana core in this world, I found it hard to believe that you needed to be a young adolescent to manipulate mana. In my old world, children could already meditate and sense the key scattered inside their bodies. Once the key migrated into a single place, the key center would form. Testing my hypothesis, I began meditating, trying to sense the mana in my 7-month-old body. There you are. Art, honey, are you having trouble taking a poopy? Mother, I'm about to begin my journey to become the greatest mage in the world. Do not make me out to be a constipated infant. Picking me up and gently placing me in her arms, I was forcibly taken away to have my diaper changed, which, surprisingly, was full by the time I noticed. Chapter 3. Head Start. Alice Leyland's POV. Arthur had to be the most adorable baby, and I'm not saying this because I'm a doting mother. No. Him and his scruffy little patch of glowing auburn hair and playful eyes that almost radiate blue light, while his gaze, at times, seemed almost intelligent. No, I told you, I'm not a doting mother. I plan to be a strict and just mother. I can't rely on my husband to teach little Art any common sense. For God's sake, he tried to teach my baby how to fight when he could barely crawl. I know this little rascal would turn out just like his father if I left him be. As soon as he started crawling, I was so proud I was on the verge of shedding tears. But I didn't know how much of a handful he'd be as soon as he became mobile. I swear, there's not a single moment where I can take my eyes off of him before he crawls into the study room. How weird. We made sure to buy him lots of stuffed animals and wooden toys to play with, but he always ends up going to the study room. That, at least, was directly opposite of his father, seeing how Reynolds almost gravitates away from texts longer than the weekly newspaper. Looking at how excited he got when we went out to town, I decided to go shopping for food once every other day instead of twice a week. No, I told you, I'm not a doting mother. This is for his education of the outside world and for fresh food in the house. Yeah, haha, that's it. My son seemed to be interested in a lot of things. I can't get enough of seeing his head, that seems so disproportional to his little body, turning left and right while trying to take everything around him in. He seemed particularly intrigued by his father's practices. Reynolds was a pretty competent adventurer back in the days. Being a B-class adventurer by the age of 28 was actually a pretty fast climb. Acquiring an E-class rank, the lowest rank, required taking a test to prevent us from sending eager but ignorant adolescents to their deaths. As for the higher ranks, I've only seen a couple of A-class adventurers in my years of working there, and I've yet to see an S-class adventurer, assuming they actually exist. Working at the Adventurer Guild, or what we just called the Guild Hall, back then in Valden, I got to see too many eager teens. I swear, I was surprised they didn't float away from having their overly inflated egos get to their heads. At least they were ambitious. One time, I was assigned to proctor a basic practical exam, where the examinee had to simply demonstrate fundamental competency in their mana manipulation. But before the test had even begun, the kid fell straight onto his back because the sword he was carrying had been too heavy for him. Talking about airheads, Reynolds sure came off as one back then. The moment he saw me in the guild hall, his jaw literally dropped, and he just stood there until the guy in line behind him elbowed him to hurry up. He hurriedly wiped away his drool and managed to mumble, "H, hi, can I trade in TH? The stuff for the mission?" I just giggled as he turned beet red from embarrassment. He managed to gather up the courage to ask me out for dinner, and we just hit it off from there. Even now, I can't help but smile when I see his droopy, blue puppy eyes looking at me. Art somehow wound up with both of our redeeming traits, making him that much more adorable. You should see him when I have to change his diapers. I don't know why, but he would start turning red in his cheeks